as always, I am your host, Sean McKinda.
And I'm your host, Jackson Keller.
And we've been kind of teetering and promising Jojo Rabbit or Movie 2 for a couple weeks now. Last week it was Jojo Rabbit or The Lighthouse. This week it was Jojo Rabbit or Dr. Sleep. And if you looked at the title, you know we're not talking about Jojo Rabbit.
Yeah, I kept meaning to go see it because the only theater that is playing it, or rather the only theater that is playing it where I can see it for free, is an hour away, which is fine. I'm willing to drive that far for a movie I want to see, and I still am probably going to end up watching it. But due to various circumstances, including, the grand climate death that we experienced today as of this recording, where the White Walkers emerged and all of America was covered in snow, I was in like a whiteout blizzard when I was gonna go see it. Had to drop my mom off at the airport, and then said "fuck this" and went home. So no Jojo Rabbit for me, but Sean saw it.
Yeah. Before we dive into Dr. Sleep, we're gonna do like a repeat of what we did with Jumanji, which is I'm gonna give you a quick synopsis of it. So like we'll give you a little bit of information about it. We talked it up enough. Which is to say it's real good. You should go see it. It never really got me fully involved with it. I don't know why that is exactly. I loved like every minute of it, but I always felt like it was at arm's length from me. And it's hard to fully explain why. I think like it thematically is really cohesive and like raises some really interesting good points. It's incredibly funny. Taika Waititi is an excellent director. Sam Rockwell is in it, which is all I ever need to know about a movie, because I absolutely adore Sam Rockwell. So yeah, I mean that's the quick and skinny of it. It's a really solid movie. It's like an hour and 40 minutes long, so it's not even like oh god, I have to slog through a 2.5 hour movie. Oh, Dr. Sleep. It's good though. I would recommend it if you've got a theater nearby you that's playing it. Go watch Jojo Rabbit. Go support this weird movie about a kid whose imaginary friend is Adolf Hitler. It's
Calvin and Hobbes, but with Hitler.
Yeah, it is. It's Calvin and Hobbes, but with Hitler. And
God damn it, I want to see it so bad.
It's honestly just like it's as poignant as Calvin and Hobbes. It works really well. It's a great fucking movie, especially in the day and age where we deal with literal Nazis again. Hooray!
I've had the displeasure of knowing who Nick Fuentes was before he has risen in public renown, and seeing him rise in public renown has made me absolutely fucking sick to my stomach.
But we're not here to talk about Nazis. I was kind of hoping that Dr. Sleep would involve Nazis, and I could be like, well, you know what? We're in both movies inadvertently are about Nazis, but Dr. Sleep has nothing to do with Nazis.
No, not even a little bit. There's not even a Nazi side character, which I guess they could have put in, considering the villains. That's not really a spoiler.
No, not really. Well, just don't worry too much about that if you haven't seen it yet. But no, there's not a Nazi.
Well, so I did see Dr. Sleep, thankfully. Otherwise, this would be another Silent Hill 2 situation.
For Sean just has to like, oh god, what the fuck do I say for an hour? With Jack just be like, yep, At least this time I wouldn't be like deathly sick and being like, oh god, I need to choke down cough drops while I try and talk by myself for an hour. Thanks, Jackson.
That's the kind of support you get when I'm your co-host. But Dr. Sleep, it was solid, very solid. I enjoyed it quite a bit. Thought it was messy in a few notable ways, but not so much that it would keep me from recommending it. And that's the long and skinny of my review.
Just like that guy in The Troop. Who is also the tall and skinny guy from Twin Peaks. I tied it in because we're on. You can get to us through 25 years later, and their whole thing is Twin Peaks, and like I made a reference to Twin Peaks, so There you guys go. 25 years later, site.com. They're great people. And I'm not just making fun of them, I promise.
We gotta please Daddy.
That makes me so uncomfortable.
Oh,
yeah.
What do you think of Dr. Sleep, Sean?
So, it's kind of funny, because I really liked Jojo Rabbit and this, but I really like them in very different ways. I think Jojo Rabbit is very thematically cohesive and funny and clever and good, but kept me at arm's length. This movie I got way more engaged with, and like was way more like, yes, let's see what happens next. I'm excited. Come on, keep it going. But is far less deep. It's an interesting movie. I really enjoyed watching it, but like, I don't know, man. It's not like the next Shining, I guess, is a good way of putting it. You know, it's not begging questions of your internal soul and like the morality of artistry and the torture of your family and all that good stuff. It's kind of actiony, kind of psychological, all good, as I said. Like, there's nothing I can really be like, oh, this was bad about it. It just wasn't deep, and not every movie needs to be deep.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think that this movie, it was no small feat. It's kind of a shock that it turned out as good as it did, because I think this is the central tension of the movie. If we're talking in broad strokes, like non-spoiler, and that like you at once have to make a movie about the Stephen King book. Or I guess you don't have to, but it'd be poor form if you didn't at this point.
Kubrick, wow, I don't know where that came from.
Right. I mean, especially because with this particular, I guess we can call it a series now. With this particular series, Stephen King has been very vocal about his ire towards the Kubrick version.
Can I just jump in really quick and say that, like, I think a big part of why I feel the way I do about this movie, as someone who absolutely adores The Shining on the rewatch, is that I don't know that I would necessarily even call this a sequel as much as a spiritual successor. It doesn't feel like it feels in the same universe, but they are such wildly different movies that like they almost feel more tangentially related than actually sequels to one another, despite the fact that they really are.
So like I think this also gets at what sort of the central tension is, because in a way I agree, but in a way that I don't, because a lot of the times it feels like very hard.
In a way I agree, in another you're a fucking idiot.
Saying, but okay. I thought you were about to go for like a Wreck-It Ralph 2, like Sonic Book Club thing, and then you went straight for the jugular on my own statement. Anyways, but like so in a way, like they're in a lot of ways, I think you're right in that like especially like the plot with the villains, which is like kind of the main plot, that feels very much this is something taking place in the world tangentially and could even apply to like, the Stephen Kingiverse, like broadly speaking. Like I could see how
like the Dark Tower.
Yeah.
The Dark Tower universe is what you're getting at. Which,
yeah.
There are references to the Dark Tower in this, I will say. Like at one point a character goes, "Ka is a wheel." And I have to imagine that there is a non-insubstantial amount of the audience that just went, "What? The fuck did that guy just say?"
Yeah, I completely forgot about that, honestly. But yeah, so like, in that sense, I totally agree. But on the other hand, I think that like Danny is very much our main character, and so much of what he's dealing with is like direct fallout, like follow-up sequel territory, and I think that kind of gets to the core tension of making a sequel to the Kubrick movie and an adaptation of the sequel to the novel, just because they were so different, and how incompatible those two styles like really are. Like, it's miraculous that this movie works well as it does, I think, because like this has always been the core contention that Stephen King has had. He's I don't remember if I mentioned this in the Shining episode, but you should listen to because it was a fucking banger and that movie's great.
We got really existential with ourselves.
Yeah. And so like Stephen King has always said that like more so than the details, like the overall feeling of the movie is just completely wrong for his book because he sees and he always points to the ending, which I'm comfortable spoiling because fuck you, it's The Shining. Everyone knows how it ends.
If you haven't seen the image, you have not been on the internet in the past 30 years.
Yeah, because Stephen King's contention is that, famously, the movie ends with a chase in the hedge maze and Jack Nicholson's meme face corpse frozen in the snow, and that it's very cold and sort of distant, and that's how he feels that the whole Kubrick movie is, which I think is kind of an accurate summation. Whereas the novel, by contrast, ends with Jack kind of snapping to his senses and having a redemption moment by burning down the Overlook and taking himself out with it to allow Wendy and Danny to escape. Whereas, the Nicholson interpretation of the character is like, fuck you, I'm gonna bash your fucking brains until the very end. It
is worth noting as well that if you have not listened to this, the Nicholson character, Jack Torrance, is 100% an insert for Stephen King. Like, he even kind of alludes to that in his on writing when he's talking a little bit about, like, I wrote about this after being an alcoholic chain smoker who, is dealing with family shit. So, like, it's not a huge jump to get to that point.
Right. And so, that's all stuff, again, our Shining episode covers in pretty extensive detail, but I think what's relevant here with this movie is that more so than kind of the plot details and the characters that focus on the feeling, because Stephen King novels are big and messy and very focused on like the emotions of characters and their internal thoughts and like kind of internal struggles, and there's just a lot of crazy shit going on. They're very pulpy. And that is not a criticism. It is just an observation.
And also not a word you would use to describe Kubrick.
No, yes. I mean, I would agree that the film version of The Shining is, like, pretty cold. Like, Kubrick is very meticulous. Kubrick is kind of distant.
Kind of a nightmare to work with.
Yeah, and so, that, Kubrick... What Kubrick basically did, like, it reminds me of what kind of Hitchcock used to do, in that Hitchcock would take, screenplays that were adaptations of, like, books or short stories that he considered kind of trashy, and then, like, put his own Hitchcock spin on them. Hitchcock himself is no stranger to, like, pulpiness, but in general, like, it's a pretty common sentiment that Hitchcock would, like, elevate his material. Probably the best example of this is, like, Vertigo, right? So, too, I think, does Kubrick. I think that he was very much like Hitchcock in that way, in that, like, I'm going to take this pulpy, interesting thing, use only the core concepts, like, throw out the rest, and then do my own fucking Kubrick thing with it. Which is what makes him such an interesting director, which would make him butt heads with Stephen King, because the styles are basically completely incompatible. Which brings us to Dr. Sleep. On one hand, a pulpy Stephen King story about immortal shining vampires, basically. And on the other hand, a meditative, melancholy sequel to The Shining about growing up with trauma and alcoholism and all that good, sad shit. So, that it balances those things as well as it does is a huge credit to the filmmakers, but I feel like there were still parts where those tensions were in conflict with one another.
I'm going to kind of give the goat away a little bit here and kind of dive into a little bit of those tensions before we get into spoilers, just because, like, this is still fairly pre-spoiler stuff that we can talk about, because we were discussing these tensions and how they kind of are incongruous with one another. because I didn't really run into those. I never really felt that tension when I watched it. I was pretty enraptured with it. I never really was like, wow, this isn't quite lining up quite right. Because like I think what it boils down to is like on a surface level, the beats move along quite nicely. The moments where you want to feel good, you feel good. The moments where you feel dread, you feel dread. Like the movie is very good at conveying the emotion that it wants you to feel. It's very good at getting you to feel those emotions, and it doesn't like bog itself down in story or anything like that. The story keeps moving. You want to see what happens next. I think a lot of these tensions come from we say this all the time, how Jackson and I differ in how we watch movies. Because on my first viewing, I very much am just like, let's just indulge in the cinema that is this movie. And I'm like, yeah, all right, this ruled. You know, I had a good time with it. And then Jackson gets a little bit more bogged down into the themes. And I say bogged down, and I realize that comes across as a negative, but I don't intend to. I just more mean that those are the things that catches this boy's eyes.
I would say that's a fair statement. So yeah.
And I think that's really more when we were talking about this in the pre-discussion where we came up is like, if you're not the type of person who gets bogged down in themes, you're going to have a great time with this movie. If you get bogged down on themes, you're going to have a pretty good time with this movie, but you're gonna have some conflict because the movie has conflict with itself.
Yeah, and I think that's fair, and I basically totally agree. And that like from like a screenwriting 101 perspective, like this movie hits all the right notes. I mean, the worst thing I could say about it is that like the pacing is maybe a little weird, but I think that's just a consequence of it being long and juggling so many things. But yeah, like you said, you feel what you want to feel. You're rooting for who you're wanting to root for. The characters are memorable and likable and well fleshed out, and all that other stuff. It's just when we get to themes, metaphors, tone, I think was a big one. Like that conflict between the Kubrick artsy meditative coldness and the Stephen King like pulpy hot-blooded craziness is something that obviously I would like to speak about in more detail. But yeah, overall I completely agree and would just like to emphasize I heartily recommend this movie. It was not without my quibbles, shall we say.
Which, I mean, if we ever be like, we heartily recommend this movie, but like, here's some complaints. Something has gone wrong. We are probably clones. Please shoot us. I don't think we are who we say we are at that point. I don't think we have ever been like, yeah, this movie was perfect. Great. End of podcast. Moving on. Let's go. So let's give Jackson here some breathing room to talk about his quibbles, as he were. And let's dive into spoilers. Before we do, as always, we like to tell you what we're doing next week, which I believe, unless something drastic has changed, we're going to be talking about The Good Liar, which I believe is with Helen Mirren and Ian McKellen. So I'm pretty pumped about that. I don't really know what to expect of it. It looks intriguing, is the most I can say about it at this point.
Fuck yeah. Let's ain't nothing to it but to do it.
Well put. So if you want to do it and talk about some themes and shit now, you're more than welcome to.
So before I go ham on the themes and contradictions, I would like to point out a few fun facts, a few interesting observations. Now that we're in spoiler territory, first is that this movie had perhaps the most direct influence on my personal actions that a work of media has ever had. And that is because while watching it...
Well, hang on. You're saying that after The Lighthouse, you didn't immediately go out and stare directly into a beam of light?
No. That movie didn't make me do that. But this movie did make me take a direct cause and effect action because I realized that I had allowed my hair to grow out to the point where it looked identical to Jack Nicholson's in The Shining. And immediately went out and got a haircut. So, thanks, Dr. Sleep. I needed that haircut. So on a more serious note, a few things I wanted to point out is that, as I mentioned earlier, the ending of The Shining, the book, ends with Jack burning down the Overlook as sort of a redemption thing. Something that this movie basically takes because the Overlook is still around and is the setting for the climax of the film, replaces it with Danny, which I think is a interesting little thing, and the incorporation of that ending might be one of the reasons that Stephen King is kinder to this, although interestingly, I believe Danny survives in the novel. I have not read the book, but I've read a little bit about it.
Well, he kind of survives in this too, just as a Force ghost. I mean, Shining ghost.
You can draw parallels to new Star Wars here for sure. And the other interesting little tidbit that I think illustrates maybe the difference between the Stephen King influence and the Kubrick influence is that Abra, the second central character,
And also the base form of the Pokemon Alakazam.
also eventually evolves into Kadabra and into Alakazam upon trading to another game. So she is literally Dan's niece. Dan is literally Uncle Dan in the book, not so in the movie, because she is Jack's bastard granddaughter after he had cheated on Wendy. And so they have a proud Joestar lineage of Shining, and apparently because I was curious about the ending, so I looked it up, and apparently the way that the book ends is that like the three of them do like a father-son Kamehameha with Jack as like the Force ghost to push Rose off of like a fucking cliff or something.
Oh man, I need a drink after that one. Holy hell, what a statement.
So pretty indicative of the difference between Stephen King's approach and the Kubrick approach, which is in this particular instance where the movie airs in that Abra and Danny are not literally related, and Jack Torrance does not show up to heroically give support from Otherworld.
I have nothing to add to that. I'm just like, you did not tell me how the book ended before we started recording, and I am just kind of recoiling from that knowledge.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that. So that's Stephen King. Well, so kind of difficult to decide where to start with this one, because there's a lot that happens in this movie. I said, it was pulpy. I almost felt like it was comic booky at parts, like, and not always in a bad way, not necessarily in a bad way, like the part where Sean and our
Shit. You said something good about a comic book movie. Are you Jackson?
Please don't bully me. But yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, the comic booky tone didn't always mesh with, I think, the very effective scenes.
There it is.
There we go. I felt like I was possessed for a minute there. But no. So this is what I mean when I say the movie's kind of in tension with itself, and that you have scenes like early on in the movie, and this is why I really, really was super into the first 40 minutes or so before it's obvious how the two main plots are going to kind of converge, and that we're setting up the villains. They go around, they torture the shit out of kids to suck their shine, and
incredibly dark, I will say. The scene of them torturing the kid is, oh boy.
Ooh, there's some good brutal shit in this movie. So that was harrowing as fuck. And then, where it starts to get a little bit on the comic booky side, on the other hand, is that they also recruit new shine vampires when they have a strong enough power. It almost feels like a JoJo stand, to be frank. This is the one that can, shine like Danny. This is the one that can control people with their voice. This one can do this special thing. And they don't dwell on it super much, but it was definitely a sort of thing.
And that's two JoJo references in one episode. You thought he might have he's missed a couple episodes here where there hasn't been one. He's gonna make up for it hard this time. Don't worry.
I mean, it's where my mind went. What can I say? So there's that stuff, but until then, it's not really clear how the villains are going to integrate with Danny's story at first, which I think was effective in terms of making me interested in what was going to happen next. But Danny's story was a lot more emotionally fraught, I would say, in that we get some scenes of him as a kid again with not Shelley Duvall, who is very obviously not Shelley Duvall. And so we get some scenes of childhood Danny, hard cut to him beating up a dude in a bar, like snorting coke off a hooker's tits, and then like leaving her to die without questionably without really realizing it, and her infant son to starve because she overdosed and nobody knew about her, and he sees their ghosts with his Shining. Yikes.
It's a dark start.
No, it's great. I loved it. But so like then from there, like, you know, he makes a friend in Billy who's like willing to vouch for him because he's also an alcoholic, and Danny's fallen down that path, and like he gives this really, really great speech. And this, if we're talking about why Stephen King would like this movie a lot more than like the Kubrick version, I think this is probably the closest that the movie comes to gracefully like tying those two things together, is that Danny gives a great speech when he like, we kind of get a time skip to a couple of years later, like after he's been living in town and he's settled down and he's at AA and he's kind of found a calling as the orderly. And I really like these scenes where he gets the title of Dr. Sleep by like, you know, comforting, you know, people who are passing away in hospice care. Like that's all really great. And he has this really powerful speech about, you know, how he sees his relationship to his father, even though like he was responsible for this like horrific incident and was like a abusive asshole who he didn't really know because he was only 5 when all that shit happened. And I feel like that I can see a little bit more in this speech, like kind of giving, you know, the Stephen King version of Jack like some rope of like flawed, you know, but ultimately like human that we're trying to like rehabilitate a little bit, as opposed to the Jack Nicholson version who is just like an asshole through and through. But it's not in a way that feels like incongruous. Like those emotions that Danny has and the way that he thinks about his father, even though we are talking about the Jack Nicholson version, and we get another great moment between them when we return to the Overlook and Jack has taken the role of the barkeep. And
oh god, that scene is so fucking good.
That scene fucking rules. Like those two scenes, like I'm slightly critical. I don't think the fan service was too overbearing, but I'm slightly critical of some of the fan service in this movie. But like how they treated Jack and his presence was not like, that was some of the best shit in the movie for me.
Yeah, I'm gonna let you keep going. I'm gonna jump in here with like just 2 quick little things.
Yeah, go for it. I've been rambling. So
no, yeah. So number 1 is the fan service, as you kind of mentioned. It never really felt like Jack never felt like fan service, or I should say, not Jack. Clearly, not Jack as well. It never felt like fan service. It felt very tied in and rooted to the story. Most of the fan service mostly comes from just like establishing shots. And I don't know whether it feels like fan service to us because we had just so recently watched The Shining, or whether it actually was sort of fan service, or whether it was just establishing shots for people who haven't watched The Shining and instead just watched Dr. Sleep, which I'm sure there is a subset of people who did. Like the most, I guess, galling one to me was when they go into the maze. And when they first go into the hedge maze, it pulls out really hard with like this thing going on in the background noise, and like it's clearly the maze. Like if you've seen The Shining, you know what the fucking hedge maze looks like from the inside.
I mean, even if you haven't seen The Shining, you probably know what the hedge maze looks like.
Probably, but like it doesn't hurt if you haven't to do a little pull out to make sure. Yeah. So like I think that might be part of it. Like, so before you come at me for my, you should make it accessible to people new to the series, I'm acknowledging my own flaws again. I did it. I beat you to the punch.
Damn, roasted.
So I think that's important. The other thing I wanted to talk about is, like, I mentioned that the movie's really good at making me feel what it wants me to feel. And, like, the tension of keeping Danny on the wagon and away from alcohol was palpable throughout the entire thing and was really, really effective. Because the entire time, I'm like, oh, God, please don't drink, Like, you worked really hard at this. I'm going to be heartbroken if you go down that path. It becomes clear that it's representative of him following the path of his father, which is, it's not good. Jack Torrance, not great. So like the payoff of not Jack Torrance, well, not Jack Torrance, because it's also claimed to be Lloyd, not Jack Torrance. Yeah, you can parse that one out in your own time. Don't worry about it. Is really tense because they're trying to push alcohol on him, and even if it's in his head, like it's never really clear whether the alcohol is real or not in this or The Shining, or whether it's a perceived alcohol. Like the important thing is that he rejects it, and like it comes across as a very powerful, solid moment, and it's very triumphant. It fucking rules.
So, two things. I want to respond to both these points. The first is I'm about to do a hat trick with a JoJo, a Dragon Ball, and a Metal Gear Solid reference in this episode.
Holy hell.
So, with regarding the stuff with the Overlook and like the establishing shots, I think there's a moment in Metal Gear Solid 4 where you return to the location from the first game, and like that is definitely fan service, but that is fan service done right, because I think that it's the way that they play that is super tied into like the themes of the game and how the character of Snake is sort of aging, and like that feeling of nostalgia is central and critical to the fan service there. So it really ties in a really nice and beautiful way. I think they're going for something similar here, but it's kind of weird just because, like, yeah, in theory, both Shadow Moses and the Overlook Hotel are, like, extremely traumatic experiences for both of those characters returning to them. But with Shadow Moses, because it's a video game that, like, the player remembers having fun in, I think it works a lot better than, like, we're going to have this sort of like almost wistfulness about the Overlook when it's supposed to be this fucking horror zone and then continues to be.
See, it never came across as a wistfulness to me, especially because I think the important thing here is that Mike Flanagan, the director, did a really good job of matching Kubrick's like hard cuts and crossfades and like long sweeping shots set in like dour situations. Like it never really felt wistful until it did like the establishing shots. So like I think my problem with it once again comes from the establishing shots, but I also don't think that they're entirely unnecessary.
Yeah, the director had a fine line to walk, and I'd say he overall did it really well.
Like the cuts through the hallway are really, really good as he's just like cutting, turning corners, cut. It has the same jarring effect that it does in the original Shining, and like sometimes it's just a long, slow, long shot, and like that's great too.
Yeah. And while we're thinking about it, your second point about the alcohol, I just wanted to fully agree with completely. Like that was one of the great tensions throughout the movie, and just wanted to provide a little anecdote of in that moment before the moment with Jack, the one he's back in his apartment, and they're kind of at the lowest point. Like they have Abra, and Danny is kind of unsure what to do. He's like, "Fuck, all is lost" moment. When he has the bottle of whiskey, and he's really deciding whether or not to drink it, and like as soon as he picked it up, like there were several people in the theater, my mom included, who audibly said like, "Oh no, don't." So yeah, that
says everything right there.
Yeah, that shit worked really well. And however, this is where we start getting into into some of my criticisms of the movie, and that how the movie handles after that scene of Danny succeeding where Jack had failed. We get another kind of callback after Rose has been disposed of and Danny has now been possessed by the ghosts of the Overlook. And this is where I think in terms of tone, in terms of cinematic language, things start to get a little bit messier, because there's a moment like this earlier in the story, and that I think it does a really good job of setting up these scenes where things are really clearly established and in a really deft way through the use of like cinematic language, and then kind of doing that thing over again. And so what I mean is the ending is there's another kind of callback that after the Overlook possesses Danny, he starts chasing after Abra with the axe
in the same limp as well.
Yeah, the exact same way, which is and of course the ultimate point is that like Danny does what Jack does in the book and, sacrifices himself and goes up in flames and proves to be the better man and finally takes out the Overlook and all that good shit. Problem is that, the thematic emotional core of these two moments is the same. We have drawing a parallel to Jack. We have Danny being confronted with the same sort of trial and him rejecting it. And the problem is that I think that the moment of him at the bar is far more effective than kind of it reminded me of one of our few criticisms about the original movie, which was like Wendy's a spooky, scary skeleton haunted house tour. Yeah, and so like it felt a little bit like, I understand that you want to get Danny in a position where he's got to burn down the hotel, but it felt.
Well, he already was. That's the thing. He had set up that he was burning down the hotel from the get-go.
Yeah. So it was just a little strange that it would repeat those two beats. And similarly, this is another thing that kind of gave me...
as a quick aside, I think part of it was just like the redemption of his character in the eyes of a child, which is something that Jack Torrance never got. I think that might be the core difference to it. I'm not saying it's necessarily more effective in that regard, but I think that that's what they were going for.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Especially because, but I'm wondering if they could have just accomplished that by implicitly giving him the Dick Halloran role when he's having his Force Ghost talk with Abra at the end. I feel like that would do the same thing without having as much of the repetition,
But he would there's not really a great way to get him to die, except for the fact that didn't he get his artery stabbed or something like that? Something that was arguably fatal already. Hang on. I just talked myself into and then out of something.
Well, or because there are other ways that you could get him into that boiler room, and have the redemption in the eyes of a child that he, maybe the hotel is about to do something to get her, and Danny manages to save her and gets her out while he holds the line and locks himself in the boiler room and decides to blow it up. You could get him there in however many different ways. But this is something I noticed that the movie does a couple times, and particularly at the beginning. I think this introduces a sort of mixed metaphor maybe, and that the purpose of the opening childhood scenes, right, seems to be obviously the Overlook of the all the shit that went down to the Overlook is going to continue to haunt him, both literally and psychologically. He doesn't know how to deal with it until Dick Force Ghosts and shows up and is like, "Yo, have a creature box," and then Danny's like, "Cool." So,
Listen, you familiar with Hellraiser? Kind of like that, but you put things in it instead.
Yeah. And so Danny's got his creature boxes, and it's shown as that the lady.
I think Pokemon would have been a better reference there than Hellraiser.
Hellraiser's more tonally appropriate. Shin Megami Tensei. Anyway, Danny is being haunted by the bathtub lady, and then he gets his creature box, and he seals the bathtub lady away. And
a pretty effective scene, I will say.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this was all rather well done. And then he goes back and sits next to his mom. His mom asks, everything okay, Doc? And it's been stated that Danny's not talking to anybody but Force Ghost Dick Halloran. And so when he says, yeah, Mom, this is presented like a moment of okay. He's learning how to compartmentalize the trauma, and, he's starting to heal. He's figuring out how to move forward. Hard cut to Ewan McGregor snorting coke off a hooker's tits and beating a man in a bar, clearly showing that he has fallen down a path where he doesn't know how to deal with this. And I feel like this is maybe an intentional sort of whiplash, but it doesn't. I almost feel like the resolution of the bathtub lady and the introduction of the boxes, again, I feel like I have a little bit of that repetition problem, in that, I get that, people who go through traumatic experiences, they don't, it's not like a one and done sort of thing, and that like suddenly you're over it and everything's fine. Like in the vast majority of cases, I'd wager to say like it's something that you have to learn how to cope with kind of for the rest of your life.
There was that one time I fell in a toilet as a child and my parents laughed at me, and that's haunted me for a long time. I'm not making light of trauma, people. I'm just trying to lighten the mood here in general. Like if you are suffering from an actual trauma, that is a horrible, dark thing, and I am so sorry for you. But I will also never forgive my parents for laughing at me while I was stuck in a toilet wearing jeans. You know what you did.
All right, well, Sean, I'm gonna share my dark toilet related trauma with you as well from when I was a child. Apparently, when I was a kid, after seeing the movie Space Jam,
Come on and slam,
and seeing Michael Jordan get sucked into Looney Tunes World through a golf hole, I became terrified of holes, including the tiny hole that leads to the tubes in the toilet. In fact, like, I still have a thing about holes, so maybe this is pretty deeply rooted after all. So when I was a kid, I would have to poop. And whenever like you do.
As a child, and as an adult, that doesn't happen anymore.
I'm like Kim Jong-un. My body's 100% efficient, baby.
Yeah, if you poop as an adult, you are in fact the weird one. So in order to, I was in a quandary and that I needed to poop, but I didn't want to be near the hole. So what I would do is I would like frog squat like on top of the toilet bowl. And somehow this information became public knowledge to my sister. I don't even remember how, but there's a photo of me doing it somewhere because she wanted to photograph my shame forever. And one time opened the fucking door while I was pooping, used a cheap disposable camera to take a picture, slipped it in with what my mom and dad were getting developed, and now we just have that until the end of time, like me looking like a deer in the headlights in my most vulnerable moment. That is absolutely incredible.
And I must have been like 4 years old. Like, we were really young.
I'm sorry. The best part about this, though, is something that you might not have thought about is the fact that someone else had to develop this film.
Yeah, because it was the 90s. I hadn't thought about
So someone else has probably seen this. There's a non-zero chance that someone's like, well, this photo's getting saved for me, too.
Oh, no. Oh, God.
God, I really hope that at some point, like, this podcast becomes a big deal and, like, some weird dude comes out of the woodwork being like, wait, I have a photo from the 90s of a kid squatting over a crapper. Is this Jackson? And then it's just that photo again.
Oh, my God. Amazing.
What the fuck were we talking about?
We were talking about Dr. Sleep. Oh no. Trauma. We were talking about trauma. So,
glad we're taking this seriously.
Yeah, like, so I get that trauma is not a thing that you only deal with once, but the way
it's my first memory.
Something about the way that the movie handles this transition just feels a little off to me, like not super purposeful. Like, it's a kind of, and I think it's just that, I mean, it reminds me of one of my big criticisms about The Dark Knight Rises, in that movie has, at the beginning of the movie, Batman in his lowest point, and then he gets his leg brace and he rises only to go through the exact same character arc again immediately after it. It feels kind of like that. And so, like, I like where the story kind of ultimately goes with Danny's character. Like, I really like Ewan McGregor in this. I mean, it's just good to see him again in general. And I really like, his Billy. I like his rapport with him. I like the character feels like it makes sense based on what we know about Jack and his family history, and like his relationship with Dick Halloran continuing as a ghost. Like, that's all great. But it almost makes me wonder, like, do we really need the childhood stuff so much? I don't know, because it feels like the metaphor gets a bit mixed with then him, like, releasing all the ghosts in his brain. Like, it's supposed to be, like, we were talking and you had mentioned that, maybe this is, like, not him compartmentalizing it in a healthy way, but, like, repressing it and him releasing it.
I was going to say, just to jump in here, like, there is shown, like, what actual compartmentalizing looks like in this movie. Like, there is a scene when they're going into Abra's mind, and, like, there's literal boxes of her being like, oh, so this is how you put things into little boxes and stuff. And then they go into the evil vampire lady's mind. We really should have looked up her name before we started recording, and neither of us did. So, evil vampire lady it is.
Wait, the actor's name or the character's name?
The character's name.
The character's name is Rose.
Rose! Oh! Why am I an idiot? I'm an idiot.
No, you're not. Go on.
You said that like 10 minutes ago, and I'm just like, Rose, cool, in one ear, right out the other. Look at that.
All right, maybe you are an idiot.
No, so Rose has like this whole like library as her mental place, and then Danny Torrance has the Overlook Hotel as his mind temple. What the fuck is the thing called in Sherlock? His mind zone? His
the VR zone.
The VR zone. Yeah, his VR zone. But like there's clearly shown how people compartmentalize in their own minds, and like that didn't come across as compartmentalization to me. That came across as more of like a trauma repression than anything, especially because at one point Ghost Dick, which I will never get tired of saying that phrase, makes a comment about how like Danny's asking him like, hey, what are they alive in there? What's going on in there? And Ghost Dick's like, yeah, you don't want to think about that, don't worry about it, which kind of implies some like insidious things of like, hey, it's still bubbling just below the surface. If you open it up, it's gonna come out. Which is why you should go to therapy. Open up and let it come out in a safe space. That's not a joke. I'm playing it for laughs, but also you should probably go to therapy.
Take care of yourself, kids. And so like that tracks. That is all well pointed out, but I then have some other issues in terms of presentation.
Of course you do.
If following this train of thought. So I think firstly is just that the moment that we get at the beginning, I still maintain that even if this is the case, like there's not that uneasiness about like, okay, this is something we're repressing. It's played really, really wholesomely and really, really straight, which I guess was meant to make the hard cut to alcoholic Danny all the more shocking, but it didn't really work for me. And then the other thing about him releasing all the ghosts is and like sort of releasing his trauma, and the fact that his VR zone is like the maze, and like they use that to their advantage against Rose. Like it's kind of presented as like a really badass thing, like that like that Abra takes the axe and like basically dabs on her. Like
I'm sorry. She dabbers on her.
She dabbers on her. And like, I mean, it reminds me of like that moment in Inception where like, the Ken Watanabe thinks that he's got one over the team. He's like, in my dream, you play by my rules. And then the side character who disappears forever is like, nah, you're in mine, bruh. And then like, shit. It's like a moment. It reminded me of that, which makes the like we're sealing away our trauma, like maybe sort of questionable, and then also like he releases it and then has to burn down the hotel and take himself with it. That's not exactly like learning.
You know what?
Like. It seemed like Danny was doing pretty good, Like, I think I'd be more if there was more of that tension, but he was living a pretty happy life, that everything seemed to be going well for him. And I felt like that he was dealing with things in about a healthy way, as you could expect. It was just that him not being willing to intervene in the vampire plot was his character flaw. Like, he's not he's maybe too willing to keep his head down. But that doesn't have so much to do with like him not dealing with his trauma very well. Like, he's going to AA, he's making progress. He's got a buddy who, if we're going into classic beating a dead horse territory and complaining about individual deaths, both Billy and Abra's father die and are given weirdly no attention at all.
Actually, you know what? If you let me just summarize this, all the deaths in this movie kind of fucking suck. Like, the more we've been talking about, like, we went into this being like, yeah, let's talk classic, and then we're gonna be like, we're gonna talk those two. But like, I've been thinking about it as we've been building up to this point. I'm like, they all kind of suck. They all just kind of happen. The one that's different is the Twin Peaks giant, and like, that's the one death that has like some weight to it because it's and the kid.
I was about to say the kid too, but yes,
Yeah.
otherwise completely agreed.
Other than that, though, like, even Rose's death was kind of like, yeah, she died there. That's all. Moving on.
Yeah, a little anticlimactic. It's like they had to make room for.
Also, Crow or Hawk or whatever the guy's name is, when he gets launched out of the car, that death rules too.
Oh, that was good. You're right. Yeah, that was a good like fist pump moment. That was the sort of thing that again gave me sort of the pulpy feeling, but not necessarily in a bad way. But because like that would never happen in a Kubrick movie.
No. Yeah, Kubrick's famous for his ejection seat scenes.
But yeah, like just that like Danny and Billy go fucking commando and like using deer rifles like gun down all of the vampires, and there's like 10 of them. Like, whoa, when did they get fucking Spetsnaz training?
It's a fun scene. It's, if not a little dull. I realize that there's kind of an oxymoron to what I just said. Like, it's dull in comparison to the rest of the movie, but it's not like an ineffective scene. I think it's an interesting enough scene, and like compared to the things happening on either side of it, you're kind of like, I don't really care about this. But like, I don't think it's necessarily a bad scene in and of itself.
No, I think
that
as
make
far
sense?
as like, yeah, I think it's my problem with it as far as movie deaths more so than like whatever, like suddenly. Billy was a deer hunter, so he's a fucking crack shot. Whatever. I don't care about the logical shit like that. What bothers me more about the scene is how, like, it feels like they had a moment like, oh crap, we need this finale at the Overlook. We want to emphasize the Danny Rose interactions. I thought was very good. I like that their sort of conversation before she kind of gets taken the fuck out.
The dialogue in this movie is all actually really good. Let's just make that a pretty blanket statement. Like, I can't think of a single line where I'm like, ooh, that was kind of cringy. So
yeah, definitely. But like, it feels like, oh shit, we got too many loose ends. We got Billy who's involved with this now. We have Snakebite Andy and the rest of them. Let's just wipe the slate clean in one scene.
I don't think it was Snakebite Andy. I think you're combining Andy from Toy Story with Woody going, "There's a snake in my boot."
Her name was definitely Andy.
Was it really?
It definitely was.
Oh,
I think. Now I'm doubting myself.
Maybe my world is being rattled then. All right, one of us is full of shit here. It's probably me, given that I did forget Rose's name immediately.
I'm gonna seize upon this shred of high ground that I have and say absolutely. But yeah, and so like that was kind of lame, and that it feels like we're just doing this to wrap things up, which is why I think that the crow guy, gets a lot more of a standout thing. It's a good character moment for Danny too, because it shows him finally getting involved and using his powers. But the thing is that I find Abra's dad to be the one that was most off-putting. The fact that her dad gets killed. And she's very blasé about it. And like, I know this is the sort of thing that feels kind of pulpy, right? And that like we have to go take care of plot stuff. We have to go have a showdown at the Overlook, which is fine. But the fact that they handle like Danny's complicated feelings about his own dad, and it's not like Abra's dad is like a Jack Torrance or anything, but the fact that like they really deal with that very different but still related kind of loss in a compelling way makes it all the more disappointing that Abra's like, all right, Mom, I'm off to be a superhero. See ya. You know?
No, I totally do. But I'm gonna give a counterpoint because I think Billy's death is more disappointing. Because Billy was more of a character, and I liked Billy, and I didn't really give a shit about her dad. And so like when he just got, it fucking sucked.
Also fair. Yeah, well, especially because because there was a lot of this is maybe the closest thing to like a screenplay like problem that I might say is that like Billy, he's given, you know, a lot of setup, and that, you know, he's kind of the one who gets Dan on the straight and narrow, and then Dan gets him involved and is like, yo, we got this friendship, so you gotta help me out, bud. We gotta dig up a fucking kid. And so, you know, like the reactions.
That dialogue's really good there too, though, when he's talking about the deer.
I was just about to say the fucking deer, like him talking to Dan on the way there is like, look, either way, if you're right or you're wrong, there's no good outcome to this. like that shit was great. And so like now that he's finally involved, it's almost like, oh, okay, we need a character who can go Spetsnaz on the Shining Boys. All right, well, we're done with him.
Put him
See
back
ya.
in his box.
So yeah, definitely disappointing. And I mean, you're probably right. It's just in terms of like a screenplay level, that's definitely the most egregious one. But on a theme level, the dad feels pretty weird. So.
No, I mean it totally does. But like I don't know, I just kind of moved past it because I just didn't care about the dad at all. Like honestly, the thought that I got out of it more than anything was, well, I'm happy her mom is away because I want her to still have a mom. Like I'm happy, or not necessarily a mom, but a parent, you know? Like I'm happy that, you know, both the parents didn't get got, because that's a whole nother situation. Like I like that a parent survived.
Yeah.
Also, it's kind of hinky, I will say, that the two characters who died were both black men.
Oh.
Yeah, I thought about that.
Wait,
as it happened. Like there's a bunch of bad characters that died, but like, yeah, the two guys, they're both black men.
Huh. Well, I mean, Danny dies too on the hero side.
He does, but like, well, okay, if you wanted me to get a little bit further into it, the two guys who die without much fanfare for no real reason other than to get them out of the picture, they're both black men.
There we go. Yeah, that's the actual problem.
Yeah.
Gross.
Kinda. Which, as I said, I really like Billy. I was really disappointed when they're just like, yeah, kill yourself. Okay, cool. Wonderful.
He just gets yeeted. The self-yeet. We've all been there.
It fucking sucked. I hated it. It was such a bummer scene. I really fucking liked Billy all the way through it. Yeah.
Well, shit. I think I've said my piece for the most part.
Yeah, I think I did too, actually.
Lots of stuff that was really great. Some stuff that was kind of overall, definitely worth watching.
Yeah.
Go see it.
It's not gonna like rack your socks probably, but you know what? It's another solid recommendation from us, which that's nice. We've had a couple weeks of just solid recommendations, which is, oh god, such a nice change of pace.
I mean, I've been thinking about this, and I've noticed recently that like I feel like more and more over the course of a year, like I was thinking about this in terms of how I felt about movies last year, in that I remember that both this year and last year, as we were doing the show, like for the first like 3/4 of the year, I was like, oh god, like this is such a shit year for movies. Like, what am I gonna say during the Horsies? Like, am I gonna have to put like, you know, fucking Endgame at the top of my list because everything else has just been such dog shit? Like, but then, you know, October, November rolls around, and suddenly it's award season, and now all the real movies come out. What the fuck?
It's almost like you just answered your own question right there.
I know. I did answer my own question. But it's really frustrating.
It really is, because like that's when we both like, yeah, let's talk about this movie and this movie and this movie. When do they come out? The same day. Great.
Because like I wanted to see it talk about Jojo Rabbit. I wanted to see it talk about Parasite, and also I'm a bumpkin, so it's harder for me to go see the good movies.
Also, as an aside, just because I need to recommend the fuck out of this movie, I even have a thing that I'm probably gonna come out. Yeah, that'll come out tomorrow. Just in 25 years later is What the Buzz thing. Go watch Greener Grass. It's weird. It's great. It's one of my favorite movies of the year so far. I just need to tell people to go watch it because it got like almost no buzz and deserves all of the buzz.
I had never even heard of it until Sean had told me about it, and I'm now 100% on board. He sold it to me as Too Many Cooks but with themes. So
it is, yeah. When funnily enough, I saw it on the 5-year anniversary of Too Many Cooks unintentionally, and then like I walked out, I'm like, huh, that was a lot like Too Many Cooks. I'm scrolling through Twitter like 4 hours later, like, oh shit, look at that. So go watch Greener Grass. No, if you got this far, I don't know. I feel like I kind of missed the point when most of the people would still be listening, but.
I think people tapped out around the time we were talking about our childhood toilet troubles.
In the process of like making light of trauma and then being like, yeah, toilet poop jokes, am I right?
Really channeling my inner Hideo Kojima.
Go talk to a therapist. In all seriousness, we joked a lot about mental health this episode, but hi kids, I'm Sean McKinda and I'm here to tell you that mental health is important, and you should definitely talk to a therapist. Joking aside, it's a very serious issue. This has been a very special episode of Beating a Dead Horse. I'm your host, Sean McKinda. Find me on Twitter at Sean_McKinda. Find me on Twitch at twitch.tv/helpless_Skippy. You can find my rating at, wow, what a shock, 25 years later site.com. Go check them out.
And I'm Jackson Keller. You can find me on Twitter, not on Twitter. I can't. Fuck Twitter. No, never again. You can find me on Twitch at twitch.tv/JacksonJKeller. I've been thinking about doing a little bit of an overhaul on the channel. I was talking about that today. So it's gonna be good shit. We're rethinking. We're restructuring here. It's gonna be great.
Keeps an eyes on that. It's gonna be. I'm excited to see what comes out of that. If you want to keep in touch with the podcast, see what's going on. I'm trying to tweet more memes and shit. Like great Sonic Hereditary memes, which is a subset of the population that's like so small it's not even funny, but hey, those 10 people are gonna love the fuck out of it. Go follow us on Twitter at BADH_cast. If you want to get in contact with us directly and tell us about how your toilet trouble mirrored our own, you can be a member of our Discord by signing up over at patreon.com/patreon.com. What the fuck did I just say there? My brain. Go join our Patreon, patreon.com/BADHcast. At $1 a month, you get access to our Discord. And sometimes we'll be like, hey, tell us what we want to do for a bonus episode. If you're a $5 tier, you get access to those bonus episodes and can listen to all of our bonus episodes. They're all absolute fucking bangers. Go do that. And at the $10 tier, you can actually be like, as opposed to when we just call out for requests, you can be like, all right, listen, bucko, you're watching Barbie Horse Adventures 3, Galena's Curse. And then we have to watch Barbie Horse Adventures 3, Galena's Curse.
I want to put our lovely Stallion patrons on blast because I have had not one but two of them when I say like, oh hey, we've gone through most of our backlog, do you want to make another request? And they're like, no, that's fine, we're good with just the one. And I'm like, you're literally paying for this. use your power, people, make us watch stuff. But in addition to that, you also get a lovely little shout out right here from us. Thank you so much, Travis, Julia, Mom and Aunt Summer, request things, please. I know that you have interesting stuff. I'm calling you guys out. Anyway, thank you so much for keeping the lights on here.
And also, thanks to Lords of the Highway for the use of our theme song. It is Suicide, alternate take off the album High Octane, Low Expectations. They're a wonderful band. You should check them out wherever you get your music from. And if you have an opportunity to see them live, go see them live. They're great. And also, thanks to 25 years later site.com. I haven't talked about them enough yet this episode, but unironically, they are fucking great people with a bunch of really great, talented writers who talk about literally everything. Wrestling, video games, movies, TV shows, you name it, they're probably talking about it. Whether you want news, reviews, analysis, they probably did it, including that noise. Because technically we're on that site, so hey, look at that. They just did that noise.
Beat me to the cell phone.
So yeah, next week we're gonna be talking about The Good Liar. As I said, I'm pretty excited about it. I have no idea about reviews, anything like that. Should be interesting.
I never look at the tomato meter until after I see a movie these days, and it's been an interesting experience.
It's probably a good play. I usually come across it when I'm looking up show times. I'm like, oh, well, that's what that is then. And then don't really think about it afterwards. I don't give a shit about tomato meters. Some of my favorite movies this year are 70%. So, bye!